Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Ophthalmology Business Academy podcast. We help you develop your ideal practice with the help of other doctors and experts. The topics we cover include marketing, management, leadership, recruitment, HR, mindsets, and more. I am Dr. Parikh, one of the co-hosts of this podcast. Every listener of the podcast is welcome to join the Ophthalmologist Business Academy at www.obaacademy.org. The membership is on us, and it's our gift to you. Today, I'm excited to talk to Dr. James Murphy, refractive cataract and interventional glaucoma surgeon at Scarsdale Ophthalmology Associates. And our topic today is building your practice to what suits you and your life. And I'd like to welcome Dr. James Murphy to the show. How are you?
Great. Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, well, it's we've gotten a chance to chat for a few minutes, and I think this is going to be a very interesting conversation, and I think it's going to speak to a lot of younger and older doctors that are established in their careers, and and trying to build a path that suits them. So I think this is a fantastic talk. Dr. Murphy, maybe just start off a little bit about telling us, where you trained and what your first couple of years out of residency look like, and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. I did my residency at SUNY Downstate, and then I did a glaucoma fellowship at Columbia, and then I finished about going on it's even more now. It's going on 8 years ago. So been out for a while. And we were just, we were talking just about how I started out kind of pretty just, 9 to 5 in the city, found a better opportunity in Connecticut, and then I started there. And then how that kind of evolved into a practice where I was part-time at 2 different locations because, you know, various factors, the partnership opportunity that I wanted after really looking at the financials of that and evaluating it, just wasn't what I was looking for essentially. And so then, making that decision to, instead of really sort of deep dive, go all in on partnership and like not only becoming a partner at a few years out, but also like becoming a managing partner, like just boom right off the bat. That was a little bit, after really looking at that, my path was either that or basically maybe work part-time at 2 different locations, given the opportunities that were available to me at the time. And so I went from that 9 to 5 one location to 2 different locations. And I became busier in a lot of ways, more concentrated on the things that I wanted to do because just I was more limited in terms of the hours I were at each different location. More heavily surgical concentrated, just because when you're somewhere a limited amount of time, they're going to sort of funnel towards you and concentrate just the cases that you want, essentially, the cases that like only the refractive cataract surgeon or only the glaucoma specialist can handle. And so that really became more surgical for me.
James, so this
Um,
is this is interesting. So you mean to tell me, so just to recap for our listeners, so you had an opportunity where you joined a practice, and by the way, this so far sounds like everyone's dream, right? You're sort of a young attending, you're out of residency, you're out of a fellowship, you join a practice, and now they say, okay, we're going to make you partner. And then you sort of said, you know what, you looked at everything and you said, you know what, I think I'm better off working at 2 practices part-time. It's a, just to recap, what went into that decision making? Because again, in the sort of era we are now of private equity, taking over practices and not a lot of partnership opportunities out there for young doctors, to hear what you did and your story, this is kind of interesting.
yeah. It's very much, when that opportunity came across my desk, it was they're very much like there's actually wasn't even a discussion about, hey, let's look at the P&L, let's look at the overhead, let's like go take a dive into the financials of the practice and like how it's performed historically over the last, let's say, 5 years. Um, it's almost as if that amount of diligence was very much lost to that process. My wife, like, she worked still works in finance. She does M&A. She'd worked for the banks. She was like, "Hey, did they show you the financials? I'd like to see what." And I was like, "Well, I've got the contract here to sign, but no, I don't have those. So let's dive in and look at that." And it just wasn't just it was just a big undertaking. The overhead of the practice was pretty high. Um, and it was a big undertaking to take a practice. It's almost like you're flipping a house basically, and there's just going to be a lot of work, and it very much could have been a totally different journey for me. But at that time, it just wasn't, it just wasn't what I was going to be able to do. And maybe if the practice was closer to where we lived, but if like you're a partner now, you're a managing partner now, you're like, you're doing this like you're full send basically on one practice. If it's also a practice that's like not, you don't see yourself really 5, 10 years from now being like, this is the practice I go to every day.
Uh-huh.
If it's like
Uh-huh.
45 minutes to an hour or whatever, it's just and from a practical standpoint, it just wasn't going to work. And so that's when I went, okay, what's my backup plan? What's my next plan? And that was to basically become a part-time doctor, or really just a surgical consultant at two
Yeah.
different practices. We just go in and I do surgery, and that's that.
Which is what you wanted to do. It fits better with your lifestyle. The commute was
Mhm.
better for you. You were able to do, sort of specifically, people got referred to you for surgery. It's interesting. So the issues with the initial thing were the financials didn't make sense, which is great that you and your wife, looked into it. I think a lot of doctors might sort of overlook that and say, "Hey, this is a beautiful contract. Let me sign it. When do we start?" And the other thing is you looked at it from a sort of a down the line, with this commute to one of my locations and et cetera, does this make sense? The analogy for that sort of what you went through to me is like you get an academic institution or a hospital where a young, it's sort of failing and it's not doing great and it's not being managed well and they have issues financially. And they bring a new president in or a new CEO and they're like, okay. And then they bring someone young with not a lot of experience because you were a young attending at the time. And they
Yeah.
say, okay, we want you to fix everything. And it's
Yeah.
like, okay, yeah, but this might be like destined to fail. This is not. So I think
Yeah.
I think you
Yeah.
sort of I think that's the analogy I would use for what you went through.
Right. Exactly. It's almost like if you did that, it's like you get two jobs instead of one, because it's like, okay, I still need to be like an effective and efficient clinician. But, then also there's this entire business side of things.
Right.
And that's a lot. My daughter was like just born at the time too. She was like, she was like an infant essentially. And I was like, there's a lot going on right now. So, the other thing working part-time is I had full control over my schedule. And so, I could work 2 days a week or I could work 5 days a week.
Mhm.
And this is right before COVID, actually. This is right before COVID. And so it was just very, there was a lot of influx at that time. And so just then, not now, since then, having gone down that path of working twice, we're working at two different locations. Now I work at four different offices and I just do the same thing. And it's even more concentrated down to, there's certain offices where like I pretty much do most of my glaucoma in Scarsdale. Because the more remote you are and less you're there, glaucoma is something that requires a little bit more babysitting a lot of times, especially like bloods and stuff. So it's my practice is now, it used to be like 90% glaucoma, like 10% refractive and cataract. And now it's more like 30% glaucoma, like 70% cataract and refractive, which frankly, I mean, for me is nice because those patients are a lot easier in a lot of ways than some of the glaucoma patients. And you can't manage glaucoma patients. So if I'm at a place 2 days a month or something, like that, I'm at a practice up near Hartford 2 days a month, and I just pretty much only do cataracts at that practice because I mean you can't do a blood there. You can't like manage that. Like, oh, sorry, I'll see you in 2 weeks. It just doesn't. It's not
Right.
not something that can be done. So, um, go ahead.
Yeah. the management of course, the management of these complex glaucoma patients that have trabs and tubes and stuff, you really want that to be managed by a glaucoma surgeon, not, the one maybe even that did the surgery would be ideal because then you sort of know the intricacies of, how to treat it if the pressure's high or it's in the hypertensive phase, or there's tons of intricacies. And if you're not there all the time, it's hard to leave that on someone else because frankly, I don't think anyone these days is comfortable managing post-op trabs unless they're a glaucoma surgeon.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And none of that, nobody wants to. You don't want to be like, it's just, that's like a whole nother, that's a whole nother level of glaucoma management. It really is. Um, and I still do a lot of that glaucoma, but doing it from, Scarsdale practice is very close for me. And I'm there like, more than one day a week,
Mhm.
essentially. Not only that, but when you do, I've found over the last like now going on 4 years that when you do this kind of a practice where you're sort of like a remote surgeon and the practice at which you're doing this has to have a system in place or has to be prepared to help you with that, basically. Like they have to be, you're never gonna really be able to see all your post-ops if you're splitting your time up a certain amount. Like when I was just doing two practices, I saw all my post-ops, 100% of them, because it was just pretty easy. Now, but there's also a time limitation to that too. The more post-ops you see, the less surgery you do.
Right.
And so now when I add or when I'm considering switching or adding one of those practices, because really like 4 to 5 is about the maximum roster that you could possibly have. At least for me, it's like that. I could never even imagine being at more practices than that. And there's people there, non-surgical MDs or DOs or ODs that are like, they've done an ocular disease fellowship, and so like they're used to seeing postoperative patients, and those are the kind of doctors that you need in place at those locations to be able to see some of those post-ops, and also really a lot of ways to be able to see because I'm a little, like probably a lot of us are. I'm very type A, like I have
Mhm.
to have like certain things preoperatively, especially if we're doing like laser or some kind of advanced technology lens, like they have to have like, like there's a lot of different parameters like context, no context, how long were they out, like what's the topography look like? Is that in line with like whatever all the other, biometric measurements that we've done preoperatively? And so everyone's got to understand that. Everyone's got to be a little bit type A for me or on my
Yes.
behalf at those
Yes.
practices.
Yes.
And then um, some practices are better than others in terms of like preoperative counseling. Some practices will have a person that they hire that just does refractive and premium lens technology like counseling, and that's what they do, like an experienced technician. And other ones I've actually done, like one practice I just remotely do it. I do it use like Doximity video, and I like video counsel people, and I like slot that like a 2 hour window of that like once a week, or once every 2 weeks to just sort of talk to all the patients and like figure that out for them, basically make sure they have like reasonable expectations and like we're getting the lens they want and that kind of stuff. So it's a lot of like my Google Calendar runs my life, they say, in a lot of ways, but then also like my life runs my Google Calendar. Like I can work as much or as little as I want in any given day or week, which is really important, I think, for my life right now.
So that's difficult to manage. And I think I love the topic you chose for this talk because building a practice to what suits you as opposed to adjusting your life around the practice, I think is, but I find it's harder to do in reality than I mean, clearly you're doing it, but how do you balance, James, when it gets so busy, right? I mean, like even for me, if I have something come up personally or medically or whatever it may be, and I'm going to be out of the office next week, to reschedule all those patients is very difficult. And I can imagine, with you with four different practices essentially, it seems like it seems like it's hard for ophthalmologists or doctors in general, once they get so busy for that, it's hard, I think, to balance, the rest of your life with your busy practice. How do you manage that?
There's always going to be that little tug and pull, and that last minute thing, still like any last minute thing, patients, they get scheduled out pretty far in advance. And so there's kind of no way around that, just like basic fact. But um, one of the things is I work about like 4 days a week actually. And so, I mean, when I was right out of fellowship, like I was working, like this may sound nuts, but like 6 or 7 days a week. Like there's surgery centers that are open on Saturdays and Sundays.
Ah,
You can literally go do surgery on Sunday. So,
yeah, that sounds
and
like a that
I
sounds
didn't
like a
even
New
I didn't
York
even know that
thing.
was a thing. Going, I
Yeah.
felt like, wait, you're open on Saturdays and Sundays? Are you out of your mind? But you can, but now that I work 4 days a week, basically, there's kind of like a built-in flex there with like, if I really had to cancel something last minute, it's not like I gotta reschedule all those patients or those surgical consults to like, 2 or 3 months down the road. I could probably do it that week or next week and just like gobble up like one of my other days off. Like my Mondays and Fridays, like those are my sort of like juggling like days off,
I
basically.
see. I see.
And
I see.
and
So
so
yeah,
that if I were to really fill that out, then it becomes a little bit harder. Then you got to start tapping into your weekends. But my wife hates it when I do that. So
yeah. Well, especially with the little kid.
right, exactly.
So that's interesting. So 4 days a week gives you that flexibility that if something comes up and you do have to cancel, you have that extra day during the week that you could potentially, use
Mhm.
the following week or something. I think that's great. And then, one of the other questions I had is electronic medical record and the EMR.
Mhm.
Do your four practices have four different EMRs that you had to learn, and which sounds like a nightmare for for a lot of people? And then do you have scribes at the locations, or at least people you've trained to work with you in terms of the computer, so you're not bogged down by the charting?
Yeah, just out of pure coincidence, when I went from one practice to two and then two to three, they all had the same EMR. So, and it was Next Tech, which I really
That's what
liked that one.
that's what we use. Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's funny we were talking about PE too, and then one of the practices that was on Next Tech got bought by a private equity firm, and so then they switched it to a different EMR for like a year, and we're like, oh my God, this is terrible, we got to go back. And so there was like a lot, this like very much like
Yeah.
whenever you like sort of see from the outside like a practice that runs a certain way and that you get bought by a private equity firm, you know sometimes that roller coaster can be a little bit of a bumpy ride for a while. And another thing with private equity, people think private equity firms like are all kind of the same, but from my perspective, they are hugely different. Just like optometrists or ophthalmologists or doctors, they can be like widely different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some private equity firms are much different than others. Every private equity firm, their bottom line is profit, but some in terms of like a back office managerial, we know what we're doing kind of standpoint are much better than others. And so like there's a pretty wide variability there too. So
Yeah, it's interesting. Even in retina practices throughout the country, there's certain PE groups that have a better reputation and et cetera than others.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
and then James, another question comes up. So you're not in terms of young doctors that are considering working part-time at places versus taking a full-time job, going to even accounting. So 1099 versus W-2. So as a part-time doctor, you're probably not on a W-2, you're probably on a 1099 at these different places. Do you find that's been provides a little more freedom in terms of course, you don't have your then set holidays and your PTO with the 1099.
Yeah, yeah, and that was kind of one of those things. I was like, well, if I become 1099 for everything, then like, well, now I don't have benefits. Now, I don't have PTO. But you have to like evaluate your personality. Are you like a cool with that? Just, you eat what you kill kind of person. It's like when I work, I make money. When I don't, I don't,
Yeah,
you know. But the impact of changing my tax structure from W-2 to 1099 no brainer dramatically changes that. It's like, you work the same, but you just pay half the taxes. I mean, it's literally that's what it is, basically. And so, the benefits, I could say, oh, one of the other things is like employer match with like 401k. You can't really replace that, but there's also so many other, you know, saving for retirement investment vehicles that are available to you that aren't just that 401k employer match, that can be frankly the same or better.
Right.
And so you just have to be like well advised from like a tax and like financial perspective also. Like our tax planner, CPA guy, and then we have a certified like a CFP or whatever that person is also. And so you have to have those people to be able to guide you to like still do your retirement savings. And like my wife works for like a big corporation doing M&A. Like we're just using her benefits basically.
Yep.
Um, you know, benefits can be expensive on the open market, but they're still, depending on how much you make, you may find that just buying your own healthcare on the open market, if you are now paying half the taxes you did before, is actually also still you're in the black. You're not in the red with that.
Yep, yep. These are all things people have to look into. And for whoever, listening. So he's talking about a CPA, which is your accountant, and a CFP, which is a certified financial planner, that can be, useful to help you with making these decisions long term. So I think that's awesome. That gives you a lot more flexibility. So it's not just, you're not just sort of in this employee structure. You got a lot of flexibility there. James,
Yeah.
what do you think where you're going with this in the next 5 years, 10 years? I mean, it might be early and hard to predict because of how quickly healthcare is changing, but it seems like you've done a great job at being very adaptable and sort of moving with the flow. And I think that's really awesome. Where do you see yourself in 5, 10 years? And as part of that question I have for you is sort of, as the surgeon for these patients and you're improving their vision, I mean, you probably already have a big following of you personally, regardless of what practice you're going to. And that's the thing that people don't realize as doctors sometimes, you're sort of you're a brand yourself, right? I mean, your patients want to see you. And I wonder if there's, in the future, if you maybe want to start your own practice or what. I mean, but anyway, yeah. What are your thoughts on
Yeah,
these things?
your brain is like that. Those are the questions that I think about all the time, basically, because it's like, well, the only way that I can, I'm thinking to myself, all right, well, when I work, I make money. When I don't, I don't. How do you like get out of that bubble? You know what I mean? And really, how do you like leverage your time? How do I make money when I'm on vacation with my family?
Right,
And, as a doctor, I mean, the way to do that is like, you own a surgery center, you're a part owner of a surgery center, and there's that passive income, like coming from that. Because a lot of doctors own a portion of or all their surgery centers. So like I'm an investor in a surgery center, so I have that like bit of passive income, but it'd be nice to have a practice with passive income. And like you have other doctors or employed physicians or partners that, are the practice is generating revenue, just on an
right,
ongoing basis.
right,
And that's, I think very likely in the next 5 to 10 years for sure. 5 years, maybe 10 years, definitely. I'll have my own practice. And I was like, well, what does that look like? Because a lot of these practices that, like in Scarsdale, like when they wanted to hire me, they wanted me full time. And I was like, maybe we do this part time and see how it goes. It's kind of like dating before you get married. You know what I mean? It's like, well, if I go all in on this and it sucks, then
yeah,
okay, now I just got to get a whole nother job. It just kind of jostles up your whole life basically. But it's almost like if you're just kind of like right now, I think of it as like job wise, I'm just very well diversified. I just have a lot of different jobs. If something just isn't working out with a job, I'll just be like, okay, sorry, like, my contract is like, however many days, like notice, like, okay, it's like it's not working out. I'm not like pulling the trigger on a bunch, like pulling the plug on a bunch of practices.
right,
I haven't done that on any practice yet, but I've just organically grown into 4 practices. But if I ever needed to, I'm not losing all of my income. It's not like I have to replace that. Frankly, you could just stop working. I could just work at 3 instead of 4 offices and just do
right,
that and then shop around until or just take more time at one of those other offices that's working out better for me. And so there's so much flexibility built in. And then, I'm only 4 days a week. That other one day a week, I was like, I can spend it with family. I can like prepare like presentations or whatever for conferences or like do a little bit of research. It's like my day to just like explore the things that I want to do, like there's so many different things you can, or like I have a hobby or whatever. It's just like, man, 4 days a week to 5 days a week, or I was working 6 or 7, like that is such a massive difference that it's really nice to have that day to like when you do 4 different practices, there's a lot of administrative stuff too. You can catch up on that. You can do a podcast. You
Right.
can,
Right.
like
Right.
there's so many different things you can do, and like if you're just someone who likes to just dabble, then like it's very easy to fill that day, or just like spend time with your family too. So like I really like that the setup now. That's the kind of like fitting the job to the family, like to the life thing. But that's been going on more recently, and that's really worked out very well.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that 4 days, it really, yeah, adds a lot of flexibility because you know, it's hard, during the week, you can say you're going to do all these things during a work day, but the work day gets so busy and there's
Yeah.
so many things that come up that you have unplanned, and
Yeah.
it's sort of hard to, and then you're always falling behind. So I think without that one day to really catch up on administrative stuff, you're always sort of falling behind, and then you're in a
Yeah.
constant cycle of
Yeah.
the to-do list
Oh,
just increases. Yeah.
we were talking about the 5 year plan. I kind of got lost
Oh
there.
yeah, 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 yeah.
So like what I foresee it is a lot of these practices that I'm working for, it's like there's kind of like a type. It's like either it's like the doctors are older and they need like a younger surgeon, they've been having trouble finding one, or frankly, a lot of them, sometimes you were talking about reputation. A lot of times it's just like there's one practice that I'm working for now, and like they were having trouble finding a surgeon. They finally found one. And the surgeon was like right out of fellowship, and it just like didn't work out for a bunch of different reasons. And they're like, listen, we just want a surgeon that's like been in practice for like a few years and
Mhm.
is like, we heard from like some of our patients or doctors that like you were good, and like we were thinking we would maybe add you for a and so like you do build a reputation, because all these practices are pretty geographically like within the same general area. And so you build a reputation, and like one of these practices, and I've already had this discussion with some of the older, like in their 60s owners of these practices that I've been working part-time for, like, hey, we were wondering if maybe, 3, 5, 7 years down the road when we're like getting ready to retire, if you would want to buy our practice.
There we go.
And so like it could just be like almost my own little roll up. It's like if I buy 2 different practices and like they're pretty close and they're both working out great, and like all the employees are awesome, they know me. It's not like
Yes.
I'm just like some random doctor like swooping in to buy the practice, and they do that. Oh, yeah, I'll stick around for 6 months and then I'll take off. It's like they already know me. They've known me for years. And so you're gonna have like less turnover if I take over. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff. People are more comfortable with that transition. And so I think that's a way more organic way
Yes.
to purchase a practice, or 2 practices, frankly, and just sort of combine them, and then you've got your main practice and your satellite. And it's almost like you're way ahead of where you would have been if you just like plopped down your own practice and like built that up and then did a satellite after that.
Yeah, I think the exact word I was going to use was it's much more organic that way, and it also gives you the benefit, sort of like back to your analogy about dating before getting married, right? You've sort of what these practices are like. You're only going to buy into them
Yeah.
now with your years working there. If it has worked, then you're like, hey, this makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
That's
Exactly.
fantastic. So, this was a fantastic talk. I know we both got to get going. It's Monday morning. Thank you, Dr. Murphy, for joining us and talking to us about building your practice to what suits you. I really love the topic, and I think this speaks to a lot of people out there that are sort of early in their practice, midway in their practice, or looking to, just to sort of steer their career over the next few years. And it seems like you've remained very adaptable, and you've sort of grown your practice into exactly what fits you, what works for you, your wife, your family. And I think that's what a lot of ophthalmologists may be able to do, I think. I want to take a moment to thank our listeners. We appreciate each and every one of you. We cannot do what we do without you. If you like our podcast, kindly share it with your friends and on social media. Also, please don't forget to write a review on iTunes or Google Play. Your reviews will help other doctors and practice owners find us. until we meet again, wishing you all an amazing week ahead.